If one lolly is lethal to the lies of leftism, two lollies is an intellectual downpouring of Agent Orange. And now your host, Rob Lawley.
The people who hate righteousness are just becoming more emboldened and more angry and more embittered, and any kind of glimpse of that is just more and more annoying. It's like clanging cymbals to their ears. They cannot take it. You know, like, for example, I have this cat, and the cat hates when you whistle because it registers at this pitch that must affect her ears differently than the human ears. So if you whistle, she just literally can't handle it. She'll come over and just start nipping at you and biting at you. And I'm always reminded when I see that's the leftist, the secular extremist response to anything that has to do with goodness, or, you know, they'll talk about turning back the clock, or they'll immediately belittle it, or it'll animate them in such a way it's like their skin is crawling. They can't be around it. I'm always taken by that.
Yeah, which is why they have such a high. I mean, everybody does, but it's a fallen world. But the number of people depressed, the number of people on medication, the number of people struggling with these emotional disorders, primarily because so much of their life is just completely ravaged by sinful behavior, that they would qualify themselves as unhappy. You know, they're trying to be happy. It's what they're trying to make themselves happy with is just making them more unhappy. And it's just a big cycle. So you have someone depressed, you have someone angry, you have someone just with terrible, just lashing out in a terrible way, all because their sinful nature is cyclical. They're like trying to make themselves feel better by this behavior that's making them unhappy, but it's
right. Like a wounded animal caught up in like a barbed wire. You know?
Well, I heard this story once about, and I had never even paralleled this at all until just this second, was that how they hunt wolves in Alaska. Have you heard this?
No.
They bury the handle of a knife that's dipped in blood. And what they do is they just leave it out there, and the wolves will come and smell this blood on this knife, and they'll come up and start licking it. And in the meantime, they'll cut their tongue. And the more blood that appears, the more they lick, and the more they cut their tongue, and they eventually bleed out. And that's how they kill these wolves.
Very useful analogy here.
You just picture that in your mind, where you just think you get what you want, and your behavior is so
ravenous. It's ravenous. Yeah.
And you end up, slaying your own body with this behavior. I was reading the other day online, somebody said, well, God has created lies. God told the first lie to people. He said, when he told Adam and Eve, don't eat from this tree, you'll surely die. Well, they ate and they didn't die. And I'm thinking, well, this is not a very wise person, because they did die, obviously. But they assumed he meant you eat them and you fall over dead by poisonous. You know, clearly what he meant is you aren't going, right? If you do this, you are going to have a physical death.
Right.
So he wasn't lying.
Boy, that's such a great example of modern biblical ignorance, isn't it? The knee-jerks are like, I'm the lion in the Holy Bible, I'm going to go online and blog about it. To start there and to say, I fear God, and from that point, it's like that's when the scales come off the eyes. And when the scales come off the eyes, all of a sudden they're amazed at what they once didn't see.
But, you know, the profound thing that Paul says is, I don't know what the word is. It's something like, I am the chief of sinners, or I am the king of sinners, or something like this. And I think that is the natural beginning of having a relationship with Christ, is coming to the terms with, if you don't feel that way, there's something wrong with you. If you don't feel, in your walk with the Lord, if you don't feel like you are the absolute leader of all sinners, and that your witness is so horrible, you don't have any right to be in the presence, or to have a relationship with Christ, and be in the presence of God, then maybe you'll God will give you enough grace to show you the rest, which is, you need him. And blood is required for this, and it's your blood that should be paying for your sins. But it was already just a wonderful end of the story. But most people, instead of seeing that, they get angry because they think, how dare a group of people say that I'm a bad person.
Absolutely. And what's always amazing to me is that's looked at as this tyrannical thing. I've spoken so many times to the godless, and they'll be like, well, how dare God make us want to grapple? Well, the irony is that when you realize who you are, which is a sinner, broken, pauper, a beggar, unentitled beggar at the foot of God's grace. Once that dawns on you, and once you really, really let that settle in, that's where all your mercy and your true love for fellow man comes from. Because that, you that's the thing that they don't understand about Christians is that we are not sitting around. I know I'm not. I'm not sitting around looking at everybody and just thinking, oh man, oh, look at all these, sinners, and I'm thinking the exact opposite. I'm thinking we're all drowning men, and somebody reached in, grabbed me by the arm, and pulled me out of this mess, and that's the only thing separating me from the guy that's floundering, desperately grasping for breath.
And I would love for him to have.
And I would love for him.
Preserver. Yeah.
Lewis talked about this. He said, you can't be saved from drowning unless somebody has 2 foot on solid ground. And the atheist is mad at the guy for having 2 foot on solid ground. So he's mad at God for having the power and the omnipotence and the grace to save him. And the atheist's response is, well, it's not fair because you have 2 feet on solid ground. Well, that's the whole point.
He feels like a victim. He feels like, he's the one who's tied the weight around his own ankles that's dragging him down. He's the one that's victim. He's the one that jumped in the water. He's the one that shackled himself with the weights around his ankles that's dragging him down. He feels like he's the victim. He's not being shown mercy by being saved. He's being accused of something.
And it's so hard for us on this side of grace to understand that mentality, but I have to admit that I think if narcissism is left to just compound inside of you, you do become resentful of all that stuff, and you do start to harden your heart to it, and you do start to see things skewed so badly that up is down and light is dark.